All right. Okay, cool. Well, let's get started. So welcome to Hard Earth. Hard Earth is now in its third year. It's a speaker series that brings graduate students from across campus, across disciplines, business school, law school, philosophy, engineering, into Robley to present on their research with the goal of highlighting some of the cool work that's being done around different issues in sustainability. So just a little bit of context too. Robley Hall is the oldest dorm on campus, I guess established 1918. Nice little speaker prompt. It's a living lab for sustainability, so some students can opt in, other students get assigned, and the idea is that you can encourage sustainable living practices in a building that's this old. That's something that's pretty impactful. So Hard Earth is both a speaker series, so we have 4 graduate student speakers and then 1 capstone speaker at the end of the quarter. We'll have James today, and then we actually have one of our speakers in the audience as well, not to out him or her potentially. And so the course, it's offered as a course, a 1-unit course where we have the talks in 1 week, and then we have the discussion section the next week, and it's also just open to public, so anybody can come in and hear one of the talks if it looks interesting. Everybody's welcome. So for those in the course, sit back, enjoy the talk this week, and then next week we'll meet just over in the room next door and have the discussion section. John and I will lead the first one, and then we'll turn it over to you guys for subsequent ones, so that you get a bit of a handle on leading the discussion and you have a little bit more control over where things go. So we'll let James speak for about half of this 15-minute block, and then we'll open it up for questions. And really, any questions that you have related to the talk, related issues, something that was cool in the news, this caused you to think of, and you wanted to ask about, really anything. So with that, we have James.
Great, thanks, Ryan. Auspicious start. Great, so my name is James Winter. I'm a 4th year PhD candidate in environmental engineering and science, and most of my work focuses on water, sanitation, and hygiene in low-income countries. Much of what I'll talk to you about today is my work in Zambia. For the last 3 years, I've been working on various research projects in Zambia. I've lived there for about 1.5 years of that, and today my talk is called Broken Pipes, but it might actually be more appropriate to call it Broken Promises, to talk about the promises that we in the development sector have made to the people that we are trying to help, and the ways that they've affected these users. So first, a bit of context. Over centuries, we've come up with increasingly complicated ways to get rid of our waste, but also bring in fresh water. This is a photograph of a Roman aqueduct from 300 BC that is still operational. We have examples from China, the Grand Canal, 500 AD, and now the California Aqueduct, which was a huge California project in the 1960s that helps transport water from Northern California to Southern California. And what do these projects have in common? They are enormous in scale, a lot of centralized government work. They're operated, they're maintained by government organizations, and we still reap the benefits of them today. So the tap water that we get in Palo Alto is actually coming from snowmelt and rainfall from the Sierras through the Hetch Hetchy Reservoir. And so when we think about low and middle income countries like Zambia, the paradigm is very different. So on the left you can see this is an unimproved well. This is a well with no protection, it's just dug. On the right is what we call a hand pump. The well is drilled down, the circumference is about this big, it's called a borehole or a bore well. And it's drilled down and capped by cement, and this hand pump that you see, and it's ubiquitous around sub-Saharan Africa. So this construction is often private. It's often maintained primarily by the villages that house it. And if you drive down the streets in urban Lusaka in Zambia, there's just sign after sign after sign of private borehole operators who are willing to drill these wells for you. But it's not as dire as it may seem. There are actually a lot of reasons for optimism. In 2015, we met the Millennium Development Goal for having the number of people who are using unimproved or unprotected sources. So that would be a river, a stream, or that well that I showed you. This would be an unimproved source. So we have the proportion of people who are relying on that in 2015, which is great. We did not have the basic sanitation piece, but it's another conversation. And then in Bangladesh, one of the areas where there's so much development work, the progress that we've made on diarrheal disease mortality is actually really incredible. This shows a 90% decrease in dysentery death rates from 1988 to 2015. This is from an Economist feature. And globally, the story is actually quite similar. Since 1990, according to the Global Burden of Disease Research Group, mortality from diarrheal disease has gone down by 65%. So we have incredible tools at our disposal. There's filtration, there's chlorination. These are the foundations of what we always use. But now we have even more advanced things. Advanced oxidation with UV light, ultrafiltration, reverse osmosis for desalination. And this was the state of the field in 2015 when I decided to leave my old job and pursue Plan A for me, which was global health and which was this type of research. So why was I even interested? When I think about my influences, it does start with my dad. These are two photos from 1994 in Rwanda, in 2003 in Monrovia, Liberia. My dad's a pulmonologist. He's a doctor in Connecticut. But 1 month a year, he would travel to usually a post-conflict area. So that was his specialty, was mobile health clinics in post-conflict areas. He started in Cambodia in 1979 after the Pol Pot genocide, Rwanda, Monrovia, Afghanistan, Iraq, South Sudan, Darfur, North Korea, all the places that we really don't want to go. My dad spent a lot of time in, and that was a big influence to me. I read the usual curriculum of Mountains Beyond Mountains, The Bottom Billion, Poor Economics, Commonwealth, the list goes on. And then I was lucky enough to get an internship at the World Health Organization working on tuberculosis and co-infection with HIV. So HIV leaves you immunocompromised, and there are things like tuberculosis or other lower respiratory infections like pneumonia or things like diarrhea that can pose a much larger threat to you if you're immunocompromised than we in this room. So that actually led me to focus not necessarily on HIV positive adults, but on children who are under the age of 5 who don't have well-developed immune systems. And so when I started graduate school in 2015, it seemed like such a tractable problem. We had the tools, we knew chlorination worked. It really works extremely well. Filtration works really well. It's also pretty cheap. It's not a huge ask in terms of the financial investment. My thinking was if we could just teach people to use chlorine in their water, to add it to their water, and maybe filter it with a ceramic filter or a carbon-based filter, we can make a really big difference. But it's a lot harder than it looks when you think about sub-Saharan Africa as it compares to places like Western Europe or the United States. There's really rampant poverty. The tax base is really low, and people do even pay taxes that's on not a tremendous amount of income, which leads to weak governments or disempowered governments. The NGO revolution in the 80s and 90s might have even further disempowered governments to actually be able to make a big difference. And also there's the rural population section. I'll be speaking primarily about rural populations in this talk. And the reason that's important is urbanization rates in Africa are around 40-50%, depending on the country. And when you think about how are we going to get piped water, say, to people, or a sewerage system to people, the cost to serve grows really significantly if you have to lay pipe for 100 yards between each house. And so this has led to a number of things. So the Rural Water Network in 2010 estimated that at any given day in sub-Saharan Africa, 40% of hand pumps are non-functional. And in 1998, an internal World Bank report suggested that, or claimed that 33% of the World Bank's water projects are not sustained or not sustainable. And this is from an internal review. So we don't even know what metrics they were using. So this is all to say it's much harder than it looks. And when we think about sustainable development, especially within water, this is a much harder problem than I thought and than I think a lot of people appreciate. And so I want to talk a little bit about this pyramid that I have here. So at the top of the pyramid, so at the bottom, have people heard the term, we want to provide services for the bottom of the pyramid? Has anyone heard that term? Yeah, thank you, Yitka, thank you. People talk about the bottom billion. That was one of the books that I brought up. You hear this with NGO practitioners all the time. Well, okay, what will this service do for the bottom of the pyramid? That is, like a refrain that is just almost annoying at how often it comes up. And so when we think about the design of water interventions, it often does come from the top of the pyramid. People who are working at these international NGOs, the World Bank, the World Health Organization, us in this room. But what I want to focus this talk on, the main claim I want to make, is that even though the design of these interventions is coming from the top, we are actually pushing the responsibility for the operation, maintenance, and upkeep and actual behavior change onto the users, onto the people who are at the bottom of the pyramid, who are less educated, who are more vulnerable. And we need to ask ourselves that this is actually the most sustainable way to have improved water quality and improved water quantity. And so I'll illustrate this through 2 case studies. First, through point of use or household level water treatment. So this is something where you add chlorine to your water in your home in a 20-liter bucket, stir it around, wait 10 minutes, and then you have clean water to drink. And then village level operation and maintenance, which is a paradigm for water supply. When you have a hand pump, say you have Save the Children comes in, they build a hand pump, and your village pays maybe 1, 5, 10% of the capital expenditure. The expectation is that you will actually do the operation and maintenance on this hand pump. That Save the Children is going to leave. I don't mean to pick on Save the Children, I think they do fine work. But they are going to leave and probably not come back. You are responsible for the operation and maintenance. So I'm going to illustrate this pyramid and some of my broader claims through these 2 case studies. So this is how it works in the US and high-income countries. You have centralized water treatment coming out with primary, secondary treatment, and then you have a reticulated piped water system that goes into the home of every household. As I mentioned, the cost of service is pretty low, even in suburban areas. We live pretty close to each other. Whereas in sub-Saharan Africa, this is a picture from fieldwork in Zambia, this is not really the case. You can see 2 households here. They're about 100 yards apart, but when I was doing field work, people are hundreds of yards from the next house. Like it's really amazing how far people are. And so in order to reduce the price of having this industrial centralized treatment facility and then reticulated piped water networks, we've decided to disaggregate treatment and distribution. Distribution is too hard, too expensive, but treatment, that must be what really matters. So what we've done is we take the chlorination or the filtration, those are the 2 common things that you hear about, something like aquatabs or a ceramic filter, and you push those out to the households. And typically it'll go something like this. I will go and conduct a training, and then I will conduct a training on how to use the chlorination tablets, and then I'll provide a subsidy for free tablets, or I'll set up a microfinance operation to provide short-term loans to households, and then also stock a store with these tablets that you can then use to purchase them. And then we'll conduct what's called an efficacy trial. An efficacy trial is the people who are monitoring will say, okay, we're going to guarantee that 100% of the time you have chlorine in your water, or you're using the ceramic filter, and then we'll measure the health outcomes over, say, a month, 2 months, 3 months, and then we'll take a step back. And then that starts an effectiveness trial, kind of a field effectiveness trial. How does this fare in the real world without someone actually getting on you about using this product? And so what we often see is these efficacy trials are really impressive. You see 30, 40, 50% reductions in diarrheal disease prevalence. But the effectiveness trials leave a lot to be desired. And we see study after study after study on all kinds of water treatment that runs into the same problem. The efficacy works, but the effectiveness of it, longer term, maybe in the 6-month period, leaves a lot to be desired. And so, why do we think this happens? Ordinarily, you would just think, oh, okay, well, naively, I thought, personally, if we can just show them that it works, show them that chlorine works, we will increase the knowledge of the people who are living in this village, they will change their behavior forever and improve their health outcomes. What actually happens is, I think we can all intuit this based on how infrequently we floss our teeth, that it's a lot more complicated. This is not a thorough, what we'll call a causal mechanism or a causal model, but you can see it's not as simple as it may seem. And it actually is even probably recursive, where we need to see the outcomes of our behavior change in order to keep doing it. So this is a diagram that my advisor likes to show. Just an XY plot, where on the Y-axis is the cost of the intervention. On the X-axis is the level of behavior change required. Never used this before. Oh, it doesn't work. Darn, it's going to laser point. So the top left corner is industrial scale water treatment. It's very expensive. But when I turn on the tap to get water, there's no behavior change required in order for me to drink good water. Whereas on the bottom right corner, we can lower the cost really significantly with something like an AquaTab, but the level of behavior changes every single day for every single 20-liter container. I am going to need to dissolve this in, well, I'll need to fetch the water, put the chlorine in, stir it, wait 10 minutes, and then I can use it. And each individual is expected to use, this is the bare minimum by the WHO, 20 liters per person per day. A household is 6 to 8 people. It's a lot of time that you're just using to disinfect your water. So when we introduce an intervention that is pushing all this behavior change in the lower right corner to the household level, we have to ask ourselves, is this sustainable at all? What are our expectations around sustainability? Is it cost effective if our goal is long-term sustainable improvement? Is this a cost-effective strategy even if the short-term costs are low? And yeah, this is still really pervasive. There's still a lot of rigorous research. I was reading a paper recently on the effect of silver nanoparticles embedded in a ceramic filter and how effective that is at killing viruses for a ceramic pot water filter. And my thought is, who's going to use a ceramic pot water filter over a long period of time? The flow rates are so low that for any size family, you're getting 1 to 3 liters of water depending on your turbidity per hour. And if you think about households having 150 liters of water that they need to consume per day, I mean, like, no one's going to use this for 75 hours in a day. And so I've been really impacted by this particular paper by Steve Luby. He's a professor in the School of Medicine here. And it was difficulties in bringing point-of-use water treatment or household-level water treatment to scale in rural Guatemala. And what Steve was looking at is, he did an efficacy trial with something very similar to AquaTabs and showed that over the course of a 3-month period, with high uptake, the number of days of diarrheal disease were 30 to 40% lower in the treatment versus the control group. Really good randomization, really good causal inference. But then they took a step back. They actually started a social marketing campaign over the radio and other mass media outlets, but came back 6 months later. And the uptake, the continued usage was 2%. And so it's very disappointing that that happens, obviously, but it calls into question the sustainability of designing an intervention, but then pushing the responsibility for actually implementing it to the people, to the end users. And so I want to emphasize that this is something that has happened a lot in the past and is continuing to happen, and is something that I would argue is not sustainable, but also not effective and potentially unethical. But there are alternatives. So I've talked a lot about the household level. But some of the alternatives are saying, okay, if we have maybe 10 households sharing a cluster, in one cluster sharing one hand pump, can we have the hand pump actually deliver chlorinated water rather than having to have the water come out and then chlorinate it later? This is something that the Center for Water Health and Development at Stanford was working on through the Lotus Water Project in Bangladesh. They would have housing clusters that each suction hand pump was servicing, I want to say, between 10 and 50 households. So it actually got up to pretty large scale. And they were chlorinating what they called at the point of collection, so as we were collecting the water. The cost did go up a little bit, but chlorine's cheap. But the level of behavior change that was required really drew closer to zero, or at least was diminished quite a bit. But then also we have another alternative. Sustainable Development Goals have come out. SDG 6 focuses on water and sanitation. And the target by 2030 is to achieve universal access to safe and affordable drinking water for all using safely managed drinking water services. No one really knows what safely managed drinking water services is yet, but one of the interpretations, even in rural areas, is looking at small, decentralized piped water networks. And so the main takeaways from this first part is I would encourage us to think about how household level water treatment has very little to no track record of long-term effectiveness, and pushing the burden of this water treatment onto the most vulnerable parts of the population is unreasonable and unsustainable. And so what I want to talk about is, I mentioned the Lotus Water Project with point of collection, water quality, but I'm actually going to talk more about water supply. Water supply in a rural area that's still using some level of piped water access. So these are 2 photographs from Zambia. One of the projects I'm working on is measuring the effectiveness of a piped water system in rural Zambia that's serving about 300 to 500 people. And so they're two separate systems. So these systems are built with donor funding. This was built with support from World Vision Korea. And they often seek to empower the community. They involve them in the decision-making, non-technical decision-making. They will often pay 1% to 5% of the capital expenditures up front. They also will dig the trenches for the piping to go through. So they're involved in all steps of the process. And then they elect members to a water committee. This water committee is in charge of setting what the fee is, managing the collection of the fee, and then if there's any maintenance required, they will take the lead on procuring a mechanic or doing it themselves. And so these are very preliminary findings, just at the 3-month mark. And the findings are really encouraging. Time spent fetching water in the treatment villages dropped by about an hour per day. Round trip walk time decreased by 80%. Time spent fetching water by children under the age of 18, like shown here, dropped by 90%. By women and girls, dropped by 45%. Even while water quantity per capita rose by 52%. So I found this really encouraging. By introducing these piped water systems, you can have really strong short-term impacts. But now I do want to take a step back to talk a little bit about maintenance. Does anyone listen to Freakonomics? Read Freakonomics? Highly recommend it. So they have this great episode in praise of maintenance. And in this, they talk about all kinds of maintenance. Potholes in New York City, or bridges in Cambridge, Massachusetts. But the thing that really caught my attention was leakages in water mains. They talk about, I want to get the numbers. In Mumbai, 53% of water that's going through pipes actually leaks out before it gets to any customer. In Hanoi, it's 44%. And you're like, oh, well, those are lower income areas. In Montreal, it's 40%. In London, it's 28%. In the US, it's 20%. In the US, we lose over 2 trillion gallons of water per year just from leakages before it gets to anyone. And so we globally, we as humans don't really like to do maintenance. We prefer building shiny new things. But this is something we do need to think about. And so I don't know if any of you caught the parallels of what I was saying when I was describing the piped water system, but it's working really well right now, especially at the 3-month mark. We're seeing really good short-term usage. But are we falling into the same trap? Are we putting the burden of maintenance onto the village in a sustainable way? I would argue that I am falling into the very same traps that I was describing with the water quality. And this is hopefully a lesson that you can develop these strong convictions and these beliefs about how we should and shouldn't be doing our work. Not necessarily have that, you can have those beliefs come through your research, not meeting necessarily your expectations. And so this is a project I had the opportunity to really dive deep on, and found that it doesn't actually correspond with some of the values that I now hold about what our responsibility should be in the sector. So things like bookkeeping, fee collection, finding a trustworthy mechanic, these are all challenging, and we are sort of oddly putting that responsibility on these people in southern Zambia. And it's not like this is a universal concept. When we need internet, we have it installed by the Geek Squad. When our car breaks down, we go to a mechanic, and if our iPhone breaks, we literally go to someplace called the Genius Bar. Why are we now expecting water and development for this to be able to be done by people who are extremely poor, have very little education, and have a tremendous amount of work to do every day just to make it is kind of odd. And so these are just some snippets from interviews that I've done with colleagues in Zambia. Not everyone pays a connection fee. It's really hard to get everyone to pay. Payment is collected by a single person in both villages. It's a woman going door to door monthly, collecting money from her neighbors to pay for maintenance on this system, which sounds like just the worst job in the world. And then I asked, who is able to actually fix the system? And there's a pump minder. This is kind of a mechanic that roves around and has a regional responsibility. The pump minder actually doesn't know how to fix a solar powered system, which is what, in an effort to be more sustainable, World Vision has, and the government of Korea has installed here. So I think you can see some of the challenges that even with well-intentioned programs, if we don't think through all the way to the maintenance and who bears the ultimate responsibility, we can have, there are challenges that arise. But again, there are alternatives. There are there are people who are really thinking thoughtfully about this. I want to highlight Water for People and the International Lifeline Fund, two of Stanford's partners in a separate project in Uganda. What I really like about Water for People is their really significant engagement with government at all levels. National government, but also local, municipal, district level government from really early stages. And this allows for getting not only financial, but also some technical expertise from the government where it's appropriate. And they're primarily working with piped water systems. The project is in Western Uganda. And then the International Lifeline Fund, they have a slightly different approach, but I also think it's really interesting. Their work in northern Uganda is looking at mainly rural hand pumps. So these hand pumps, as I mentioned, 30 to 40% of them are often broken at any given point in sub-Saharan Africa. But what ILF wants to do is they have a roving pump mechanic who has specialized skills and specialized tools and knows exactly what they're doing, traveling around, either in a circuit rider model or on command, providing preventive maintenance and also repairs within 24 hours. Because the typical paradigm is, say we're all in a village together, our hand pump breaks, we're all sharing it, hand pump breaks, and we need to get a mechanic. So say I'm the head of the water community, I go around to each of you and say, hey, would you mind chipping in? I think it's gonna be 20 bucks to fix. If we all put in a little bit, it's gonna be fine. And so over a couple of days, I'm able to cajole some of you into actually giving me money. And then we send away for the mechanic, they come, they look at their pump, we give them the money for the parts that they've diagnosed they need, they go get the parts, they come back, they fix it. This could be weeks later before our only source of improved protected water is back up and running. So what ILF is trying to do is they charge an upfront fee, monthly or annual fee to the village. And for that fee, they have a hotline that they can call and a technician will respond within 24 hours. But even better is every 3 months that technician is coming around to just do routine maintenance, check the bearings, check the casing, see if anything needs to be fixed before it actually has an acute breakdown. And then every 12 months, they do a complete pump overhaul. So this is another cool model, another alternative model for to replace some of the less sustainable models of operation and maintenance that we've been practicing for the last couple of decades, really. And so the takeaways here, I want to emphasize that we should be using experts to take care of expert level equipment. There should not be an expectation that very challenging equipment should be able to be maintained by people with no training and very little education and very little time that they can spare. And also I want to say that the government is the only real way to scale. If we want to actually make sustainable change, the government is not the enemy like we believe in the 80s and 90s where everything was about trying to get around corrupt government. If you think about the largest NGOs in the world, they take in about $1 billion a year. And say they do 80% on programs, looking at 800 million. Let's say they spent all of it in water, which is obviously not true. $800 million, they typically work in those big ones typically work in about 100 countries. Yes, it's not a uniform distribution, but we're looking at like $8 to $50 million spent in a country by the largest NGOs. I mean, Zambia's healthcare budget is $3 billion a year. When we talk about actually going to scale, like let alone India or China, when we want to go to scale and have something really sustainable, the path does pass through government. And so I want to revisit this pyramid that we started with and emphasize that my claim here is that we're putting too much burden of water development and sustainable water implementation. The design is coming from the top, but the ultimate responsibility is coming to the bottom, is falling upon the bottom. And so when aid communities are providing this household level water treatment or village level piped water systems or hand pumps, we need to be really thoughtful about how we're approaching it. And if we really do care about sustainable development, or just to be more thoughtful about design, yes, but also thinking about who we are asking to shoulder the responsibility, about the shoulder responsibilities for the ultimate operation and sustainability of these water treatments and international development. So I want to close with some acknowledgments for my very generous funders and great collaborators, and of course my field team in Zambia. So thank you, and happy to answer any questions.
What would you say is like the technician to pump ratio?
Oh, good question. I think right now it's a little tighter than they want. They're still not profitable. I think it's like 1 to 20 or 1 to 30, but depending on the transport and the distances between the pumps, it could probably be 1 to 50 or more.
Over what? Like over?
Over what area? Ooh, really depends on the road quality.
Sure.
Yeah, that's a tough one for me to answer though. Yeah.
How dense does the population have to be for any of these like piping solutions to work, right? Because there's some threshold at which like the population, it's like just too rural even
Yeah.
for this mechanic situation to happen.
Yeah, and so that's a really good question. So we see in Alaska actually, still a lot of people don't have in-home pipe water because of that. Like we are a very rich country. Alaska has a lot of other challenges, but not everyone has pipe water. You see this in Indian reservations as well, like when they're living in really rural, really mountainous areas. It can be challenging to lay pipes there, even for a wealthy country like the U.S. So what is the actual density? It really depends on political will. Like I would say if the Native Americans were a lot wealthier and a lot whiter, they probably would have had pipe water by now. But yeah, so just in Zambia, the pictures I was showing you, they are laying a pipe water network, even though the households are 50 to 100 yards apart. They tend to cluster a little bit, like every 100 yards there might be 3 households together, then another 100 yards there might be 3 households together, so it makes it a little bit easier, but yeah, there's no like metric.
And could sort of this be a reason for people to live closer, right? Like,
Yeah, I mean,
people need that
urbanization.
much space, right?
Yeah, do people need that much space? This is a question I always think about. Yeah. So urbanization rates in Zambia are about 40%, 45%. In the U.S., they're closer to 80, 85%. And there are development trends toward cities, where populations tend to migrate towards cities, partially because of improved services, economic opportunities. I'm not a specialist in demographics, so I don't want to like overstep myself, but yeah, that always runs counter to the cultural importance of being on your land, and also the economic. If, for example, I live in too mountainous of an area for water to get to me, it's going to be hard for me to sell my house. I'm not going to get a great return on my house to then move to a place where I do have better water access. Yeah.
So you mentioned that you followed up 3 months after the intervention. Do you have plans to look at maybe a year, 2 years?
Yeah. So I'm going back in June to look at it again. But
do you have any hypothesis as to like how it will compare to the 3 month point?
so my main concern is loss of pressure at the endpoints of the systems. So some of them are rings. Some of the pipe networks are rings. Some of them actually have endpoints. So my concerns would be loss of pressure due to leakages or acute failure from a pump burning out or something, which shouldn't happen within 9 months. But yeah, I mean, that does. Yeah, that would be very worrisome for these communities, because especially if one of them is powered by like the electrical grid, which is easier to manage and easier to troubleshoot. One is powered by solar, which someone from Lusaka would have to come down 6 hours to fix that. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about strategies and how places can work with governments, especially since you say that that's like a more like long-term sustainable strategy, just given the scale of government budgets, but also on the other hand, which you also acknowledge is that some of these countries have various levels of corruption.
Sorry, could you state your question again?
Just talk a little bit more about strategies and how to work with
governments.
governments. If you've seen something that's more successful or...
So I've had personally very good relationships with municipal governments in Zambia. I totally trust that there are certain places where working with the government is far more challenging. I mean, general strategies are ensuring that there are accountability mechanisms as often as possible, making sure contracts are widely distributed, that you're taking certain problematic behaviors that you might have observed in the past into account when you're negotiating these contracts. But I can't really speak too much to like negotiation with governments on that front. Yeah.
When you talk with community members in these spaces that you're working in, what are their concerns, and do they have ideas as well, or are they receptive to
Yeah.
the ideas that you're bringing?
So that's a good question. To be honest, one of my regrets is not actually providing any of these good ideas I've talked about in the last slide, and relying primarily on this village level operation and maintenance model, which is very pervasive in the NGO environment. It follows with their desire to empower communities. In terms of, I think there is still a bias toward, just like all of us, we think that only good things are going to come for ourselves and bad things are going to happen to other people. Very few people express pessimism about their system requiring maintenance in the future. I don't think everything's going to be fine, and the maintenance issues will probably happen to someone else. In terms of measuring how interested people are in, for example, that all-inclusive package of service and maintenance, that's something that's ongoing with, actually, Dan Smith, also in our research group. Yeah. Oh, sorry, yeah, in the front row.
How good is water distribution in cities, and who provides that?
Yeah, that's a good question. In the major cities, it's usually piped in-home. It's almost exclusively intermittent, so there will be certain times when the water is on, certain times when it's off. That can be predictable or not, and that's provided by the municipal government. There are really large concentrations of urban slum developments in a lot of major cities that do not receive municipal services. They're unofficial squatters, think of favelas in Brazil, urban slums in Bangladesh, and those are usually using some kind of shared tap or siphoning water. Yeah.
So I think you're saying 20 liters per day is the average kind of per capita number that you use?
So that's the minimum for drinking water, for water consumption, that is recommended by the WHO.
Is that including like washing, sanitation, stuff
Yes.
like that? Okay, because I'm thinking like, if the problem is drinking water and making sure that people are ingesting
Yeah.
a clean source of water, is there any way to separate that from, say, like washing, or I'm not sure if there's the same water source for like agricultural sources,
Yeah.
or people are growing crops and livestock and things like
Mhm.
that? Does that in any way make the problem
Yeah,
easier?
so it certainly will make the problem easier. For something like irrigation, it would be separate from the 20. The 20 is for drinking, cooking, drinking. I think it's actually just for drinking and cooking, and even basic hygiene might be included within that 20 liters. But when we think about what we use, and most upper income countries use, about 300 liters per person per day. So the 20 is a tough stretch already, and it's usually used. That standard is usually used in emergency conditions and in refugee camp areas. Yeah.
It seems like there's a lot of literature out there that suggests that there's poor effectiveness of point of use, and it also seems like there are a lot of people still pushing that solution. One, why do you think those ideas are persisting? And then two, what do you think what push is required other than evidence to shift perspectives into a new way of thinking about solutions?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when Christine says point of view, she's talking about the household level treatment that was the first section at the top. Why do I think people are still doing it? It's usually coming from a good place. These people are still trying to make a difference, and reasonable people would disagree with what I've just said, and they'll say it's the most cost-effective way on a per liter basis of improving people's water quality. So that's, I think in a naive way, like that's true in many cases. Like on a per liter basis, using Aquatabs is going to be cheaper than any of the other systems I've talked about. And I can't answer the question of why they haven't gone back in 12 months and like looked in the mirror. I don't know why that is. In terms of path forward, I think people. I'm not the only person who thinks this way. I think people are coming around to the idea of sustainability, like the topic of this quarter's talk: sustainable development, sustainable environmental development. That there are not only ethical implications of putting the onus of behavior change on the most vulnerable people, but it's also not that effective if you're trying to get bang for your buck. Yeah, Pepe.
So you may have touched on this earlier, but along the whole integrated maintenance theme, are you aware of interventions that emphasize maintenance as opposed to installation, or maintenance of prior installations, and whether those have been effective?
Yeah. So in praise of maintenance was the Freakonomics episode that Pepe's referring to. In terms of interventions, no. I'm trying to think of. I guess it would be they do. Would they prioritize maintenance or would they rehabilitate old water points? I guess either.
Yeah.
That would be cool. Charity Water, I know, does some of that. They have like a special fundraising vehicle. I think it's called Pipeline. That is just for maintenance. They go around and they just rehabilitate old boreholes. But yeah, it's still not particularly attractive. In the U.S., there's a rotating fund for loans to local government to fix aging infrastructure. But you've probably read like every single report about Infrastructure Week that apparently is happening every single week of the past 2 years. That there's going to be a really big investment in that. Yeah, Brian.
You hinted at the beginning about your impetus for going into a graduate program in this case. I was wondering if you could just elaborate a little bit on how you decided that this was the path for you or what you were doing before.
Yeah, in terms of when I decided that was the path for me, it was actually relatively early on that I had the idea to do work like this. I definitely was influenced by my dad. When I was in 8th grade, I went to I tagged along on his trip to Ethiopia so it was not a conflict area. It was after one of the Ethiopian famines, working in an orphanage there, and that was like as stereotypically transformative as you would think. And then I took a great class in college that was talking about global health and actually the intersection of social anthropology and global health, specifically looking at why it's so hard to deliver high quality care for people with drug-resistant tuberculosis. It's like it's 2 years of therapy and the side effects are just awful that you're just supposed to deal with for 2 years. And it's a terrible disease, like really, really bad. And so that was a really impactful course for me. I remember actually hearing a lecture about one of the faculty's work in Tajikistan on that question, on like how do we get compliance of care. And like I remember sitting in that class, and then at the end of class I was staying after, and I wrote an email to him asking like, what can I do over the summer that would possibly be relevant to this? And that was how I ended up applying for an internship at the WHO. And then, but you know, my background was a little weird. I majored in applied math, and then I worked in El Salvador for 9 months in public health, doing like nothing really important. In fact, I was actually distributing clay pot ceramic filters like, in the rural areas of El Salvador. So I've definitely made all of the mistakes I've identified in this presentation. Then I worked in management consulting for 3 years in Boston and London, and then I decided that it was time for Plan A. I applied to graduate school and came back.
Awesome. Well, if nobody has any other questions, thank you very much.
Cool. Thank you, John.
Feel free to help yourself with snacks on the way out if you want. Thank you. Thanks for your flexibility there too.
Yeah, no problem.